The story I have for you today is a memory of something that happened way back in high school, so in the 1980s, and it involved me and my friend Marshall, who unfortunately died quite young. You may have heard me reference him in several other stories, in particular the one about midnight sales and services, but I've mentioned him a few other times. And this isn't about him dying. This is about both of us going through something at my mother's old house in the Hills of Delafield subdivision, which was just north of the village of Wales, officially part of the township of Delafield, kind of out in the country, but it had been developing at that time. And Marshall was somebody who I knew from the crowd that I hung out with at Catholic Memorial High School. He was a year ahead of me. And so I think this would have been like my sophomore, his junior year, most likely, or perhaps it was his senior year and my junior year. And, we were all in what you would call the burnout. So the people who wore black leather jackets or jean jackets and tended to engage in some criminal activity from time to time. They actually had a racket going called Midnight Sales and Services, which I've done a whole video about, that I got brought into and worked security for when they would go fence the things that they were stealing. And, we all listened to heavy metal and, hung out together a lot. So anyway, long story short, me and Marshall came to be really close friends. And he would hang out at our place quite often. My mom liked him quite a bit. I think she got to know his parents. His parents liked me as well. And so, it was not that unusual for him to drive out to our place and hang out. And sometimes for us just to my mom would take off and we'd hang out there. My sister would be there as well, my younger sister. And we'd do things like watch Iron Maiden's Live After Death or go shoot off fireworks or, drive around and all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, this is a night, and me and Marshall, it was on the weekend, so I think that he was going to sleep over at our place. My mom and sister were off doing something, maybe a school event or something like that. My sister probably would have been in middle school, because if I was even a junior, she was 3 years behind me. So maybe some school activity. So we're hanging out in the place, and I think we were playing Axis and Allies. That's a board game that kind of replicates World War II. It's not super complicated, and we were really into it. We enjoyed playing it. So anyway, we're there in the house, I think in the living room perhaps. The family room with the fireplace. We didn't have a fire lit or anything. And both of us could tell there was something out in the woods. So I lived on Glacier Pass at the time, which was a road that kind of wound around. There were a couple cul-de-sacs off of it. It was the main trunk for this subdivision that we lived in. And behind the houses that were on Glacier Pass, there was a ridgeline that now has been developed into housing, but back then was still relatively untouched. And all the backyards kind of terminated in a woods that then led up to this wooded ridgeline. So there was a pretty sizable woods, and then there was like a lot of meadows. And I've talked about this in other videos as well, which I'll link to below. So, it was very dark out there. Some houses had floodlights that would go into the back, but not a lot of people were super interested in illuminating essentially a dead space. So, and we weren't either. So that night, Marshall and I, It's almost like, when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, we could tell there was something wrong. There was something out there in the woods that wasn't supposed to be there. And we didn't know whether it was an animal or a person or, maybe a bunch of people or, some wild dogs in a pack that happened every once in a while. So we were like, what's going on out there? And we didn't hear any noise, but we just had a feeling. So, we were kind of tough at the time. We both, typically carried knives, and we go into the garage. And I don't remember what Marshall picked up. We had a bunch of we used to do some nowadays I think they call it live action role playing, but we were much more on the live part. I had a big club from a tree that I'd cut a while back with a huge knob at the end. And, sometimes, not just Marshall and me, but kids in the subdivision, we'd get garbage can lids, and we called it playing nights. We'd get slats of wood, and those were swords, and we'd go at each other. And we're lucky nobody actually got severely hurt. So I had this big club and my knife with me in my back pocket. Marshall picked up something. I think he picked up the hatchet that we had. We had a nice, hatchet to cut stuff up. And so we're like, okay, we're armed. We're going to go and check out what the hell's going on out here. And the lot that we had our house on was about an acre in size. And the house was, more towards the front than the back. We had a pretty significant backyard. And it's dark, and me and Marshall are going out there, and so we're like young, athletic, fairly, foolhardy, aggressive young guys who've been in a good number of fights already with fellow students, and we're into martial arts and that kind of thing. It was the 80s. So, we're reasonably confident that whatever's out there, we're going to be able to handle. And the backyard wasn't unfamiliar to us. I mean, we went past the place where we would, make bonfires and hang out and drink beer and play music and party and stuff like that. So anyway, we're walking out there towards the woods. And by the time that we got halfway there, without talking to each other, we find this out later on, both of us start to feel this sense of fear. And it's interesting because, Aristotle talks about fear and confidence. A person could, they're not just a single continuum, right? You could feel one and feel the other at the same time in a kind of mix. And that was at first what was going on. We're neither one of us want to back down from something that we're going to do, but we're feeling this fear. And it's not it's not the kind of fear of social disapproval or anything like that, insecurity. It's oh man, there's something scary going on. And as we get closer and closer to the woods, that sense of fear just elevates. And we didn't even make it to the edge of the backyard, which was, grass and stuff like that, and then where the woods began. We got close to it. And by that time, both of us, and we talked about this afterwards sort of independently, both of us were just flooded with this sense of fear. When people talk about terror or horror or panic, that's the sort of thing that was ramping up in both of us. And I could tell you that I felt like there was something out there that was huge and dangerous and malevolent and could basically swat us aside like flies. And, suddenly I realized I'm going out there with this big club, and Marshall's got an axe. And that probably would just, not even tick off whatever is out there, but we're not going to be able to tangle with it. And we didn't hear anything. We just felt this. So both of us get to almost the edge of the woods. And, like I said, the fear is ramping up. And suddenly, independently of each other, we just broke. And both of us dropped our stuff and took off running back to the house, like sprinting, like we need to get the hell out of here before this thing decides to start paying closer attention to us. And we get to the house. We go through the garage that we came out, into the backyard, get into the living room. We pack up the game. We're not talking to each other at all. We pack up the game real hurriedly. We grab our jackets, and we go out to Marshal's car, and he starts it up, and we peel out of the driveway, go down Glacier Pass, get onto Highway 18, take it up to 83, or Highway 83, and take it up to 94, and we drive into Milwaukee. And we don't talk. We don't even look at each other for at least 10 minutes until we're well, on our way to Waukesha, maybe even past it. And then we start talking, and we both had the same experience. And he drives all the way into Milwaukee to his uncle's house. And we get out, and his uncle's like, "What are you doing here?" And his uncle, had a wife and a young kid. And Marshal's like, "We just thought we'd drop in on you and hang out. Do you think we could, spend the night? We don't want to stay out there at Greg's place in Wales." And his uncle's like, "Yeah, go ahead. Let me get you some beers and stuff like that." And we're both, kind of shaken by the experience. And by now we've kind of compared notes. And the freaky thing was that we didn't confer about this. We just felt this, took off running, didn't even pause to think about what we were doing, packed everything up, got in the car, and got the hell out of there because we just wanted to be away from this malevolent presence as quickly as we could. And we figured putting miles behind us would be okay. And I don't have any idea what was out there, Sometimes people like to talk about the occult and ghosts and things like that, and I don't completely dismiss that sort of thing, but I'm pretty incredulous about most stories that are being told about that sort of thing. So I won't rule it out, but I'm not going to say that there's a significant probability that it was a ghost or a demon or anything like that. And why would there be anything like that out there? But it did remind me of, legends that I'd read and things like that about the wild hunt and, scary things like that, the dead horse. But, could it have been that there was some animal out there that wasn't typically around? I mean, we could both feel this presence of something, unnaturally large. So it wouldn't have been like a dog. Could it have been that there was a cougar or a bear or something like that? I don't know, we don't get wild boars up in Wisconsin typically. And we never did figure out what it was. We drove back the next day in the morning after having some breakfast at his uncle's place, and Marshall, and I went out and we picked up the axe and the club and took them back in the garage, and we actually walked around the woods looking, and nothing looked different. There weren't any footprints. There wasn't any weird broken limbs on bushes or trees or anything like that we could discern. So one possibility is it was indeed all in our head, a folie à deux, so to speak. But that didn't seem all that likely either, because what could possibly have provoked it? And what could have scared the hell out of us? These two kind of stupid, foolhardy guys in high school. so badly without there being anything to see or hear or even smell, just feel. And, we didn't really talk about it much after that. I've thought about it from year to year and never come to any sort of conclusion. But it was kind of an interesting thing to happen. I probably would say, I've been scared at other times in my life. That has probably been one of the times that I was most scared, just filled with fear. So, that's probably why it stuck with me so much, the impression of that emotion. And, Marshall and I didn't talk about it really afterwards. I think we just kind of put it in the back of our minds. He unfortunately died in a car accident when he was 22, 23, while I was in college. And I remember going to his funeral. I might tell a story about that some other time, because his family was connected with some interesting local stuff that went on about Laurencia Bembenek and the Milwaukee Police Department. But that's maybe for another time. So that's it for this story. Maybe you've had similar experiences. Maybe you'd like to say, oh, it was all in your head or whatever. I don't even know what the case was, right? But I think it makes for quite an interesting tale.